Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bouncing Back. I'm your host, Joanna, and today we are going to be chatting about the art of listening and how we can overcome miscommunication through active listening. And I've actually been thinking a lot about this topic recently because I've been sort of analysing my own listening habits and conversations, and it's actually made me realise how difficult active listening can be and how it can really lead to miscommunication a lot. So hopefully today we'll get some tips and tricks to become better active listeners, and joining us today to do that is our guest, Neryl East. Neryl is a certified speaking professional and credibility expert who's worked with leaders at the highest levels of government and business. And through her presentations, masterclasses, and coaching, she guides people to become confident, comfortable, and credible communicators. Hi, Neryl. How are you today?
I'm really well, Joanna. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Now, before we dive into everything, I'd love if you could tell us a bit more about who you are and what it is you do.
Excellent. Well, I'm a journalist from way back. I started in radio and TV, and then I crossed to the dark side into corporate communication roles. So I worked in various places, and it became obvious to me pretty quickly that a lot of leaders and organisations had no idea how to communicate effectively with each other and with the outside world. So I've really made it my mission since then to help people feel more comfortable and confident so they can be authentic. They can build trust, and that really starts with being great listeners. So I'm so glad that you've chosen to focus on that theme today. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And interestingly enough, yesterday I was scrolling through Instagram and I came across this post by Mel Robbins. I'm not sure if you've heard of her before.
I have.
Yeah, she's fabulous. And she made a post titled 7 Ways to Keep Your Cool Instead of Saying Something You'll Regret. And I found that really interesting because when I think about like all the things that have gone wrong in conversations I've had with people in the past, it's because someone hasn't been able to maintain their cool. Like, for example, Mel said, stop trying to win and seek to understand in your conversations instead. Try deep breathing, act like the person you want to be instead of acting out on the emotions you feel. So I feel like that's something really important that I would love to chat about today. Just like how we keep our cool during conversations so we can actually make them productive.
So powerful, isn't it? And most of us are terrified of silence. So I love Mel's tip about just stopping and breathing. And, that's about the most basic piece of advice you can give another human. But it also just unlocks the key to so much in conversations in terms of understanding and mutual respect, good listening, great communication.
Yeah, definitely. I hate silence. Whenever I feel silence in a conversation, I'm like, I got to say something. What can I say to like fill this awkwardness? So hopefully we'll get to touch on that today as well.
For sure. Yes, looking forward to it.
Great. Well, before we dive into all of that, we have a section called Have You Met Neryl? So here we just get to know you with some little questions. So my first one for you is, what is your favourite book?
Look, I'm going back to one of the classics, Joanna, Wuthering Heights. I can't go past that for its romance, its mystery. It's a bit weird and crazy in parts. And I've just always loved that book since I was a kid. Never get sick of it.
Oh, amazing. I actually bought that book ages ago because I found the most beautiful cover art for it that some sort of artist designed for the book, but I've never actually read it. So I'm glad you mentioned it. It reminds me that I actually need to get around to reading it.
Recommend it highly. It's a classic for a reason.
Great. My next one for you is, what movie have you enjoyed recently?
Oh, this is a bit embarrassing because I don't watch a lot of movies, but you know how there are some movies that you watch like over and over again when there's nothing else on? So the
Yeah.
one that came to mind, there's quite a few of those, is The Intern. So that's a
Yeah.
movie with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway, and just a beautiful feel-good movie. It's got some punchy lines, and Robert De Niro isn't being a crook or a con artist. He's being one of the good guys. Really well acted. Love that movie.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I love that movie as well. I feel like
Yeah,
it's a classic. It's one of those movies where, like, even though you know the plot and what's going to happen, it's still great to watch over and over again.
absolutely.
Yeah, great. I love that one. Got a couple more here. So, what are you listening to any podcasts at the moment?
Look, I love podcasts, which is great that we're on a podcast. So I'm
Yeah.
fantastic to be a guest. So a couple of my favourites. One is James Wedmore, which is all about running a business, but basically from the inside out. It's being a mindful entrepreneur. So I followed James for many years. He's fantastic. And the other one I love is Jack Canfield, who has been around for a very long time, but he's only just recently started a podcast. And again, it's in the same vein. It's the power of visualizing and really the fact that to be a credible communicator, credible leader, good listener, all of these things we're talking about, it's an inside job. It starts on the inside first. So they're my two favourites.
Oh, great. Yeah. I find that podcasts are so great, especially when you learn something from them. I've got my podcasts that I listen to that are just fun and easy, but then there are ones where you're like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. That's actually really cool.
Yeah, yep. They're my go-to at the gym. And I do like the kind of business and professional development interwoven. I guess that's my favourite genre.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I'm definitely in like my true crime phase at the moment. I'm very invested in that, but I know I need to branch out. So thanks for those recommendations.
You're welcome.
Great. So we've got one more question here, and that is, do you have a role model?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And the person I'm going to say actually is a politician, but they're not in politics anymore. But when they were, they really packed an amazing punch. And that was former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
Oh, yeah.
I just found her an amazing role model, and I had the privilege of seeing her speak about 6 months ago in Sydney. I love her balance of competence and being able to be a hard-edged leader, as she had to be when New Zealand had some, terrible incidents like the Christchurch shootings, but also very real, very personable, very relatable. And the most effective leaders in terms of credibility are the ones that can get that balance right. And I think she did. So, her political career came to an end. So I guess everything has its season. But I think as a communicator and a leader, she's a terrific role model.
Yeah, I think that's great. Like, even though, like you said, she's not in politics anymore, she's still left behind that legacy of being a really great person to look up to for the things she did and like the way she spoke, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, let's get into the nitty gritty of today. So
Yes,
yeah, let's go. My first question for you is, what does personal resilience mean to you?
It's the ability, I think, to not allow what's going on the inside of you, however turbulent and chaotic that might be in the moment, to overshadow your actions externally in the present, in the present moment. Because if we don't master our personal state or even manage our personal state, that can spill over into unhelpful actions and words that take a very long time to repair. So it's easier said than done, I think. But people who have a high level of personal resilience are able to stay calm in really difficult circumstances and be at their best, be of service to others, rather than letting their own personal feelings boil over. Yes, those have to be addressed too. We don't just squash them down, but being able to have that out of you and manage the inner state, I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like when things happen to us, especially bad things or negative things in our lives, it's very easy to get caught up in how it makes us feel and like turn that into what we deal with, as opposed to like what's actually happened and how we can learn from it and how we can use this as like an opportunity to grow, which is what I personally think personal resilience is about, is that ability not to just like bounce back, but also to see everything that happens as a learning opportunity. So if you get like really caught up in how you're feeling, like our feelings can be quite negative sometimes. So they can bring us down, especially when something terrible happens or something that's very unmotivating, I guess.
Yeah, and that's right, because we can make it all about us, which is, then we're stuck in victim, not going to be really open to other opportunities. But yeah, being able to see that bigger picture, and now we ask powerful questions, that helps us move forward, and it helps other people too.
Yeah. So what do you think the connection between resilience is and miscommunication? So what happens there?
I guess a little bit like you just described, Joanna, when you're having an interaction with somebody, whether it's one person or you're in a group, somebody says something or you notice something, what we tend to do as humans, we go into our own story. We immediately start to take what we've seen and make meaning of it in some way. And often that is framed around, what that is doing to us, the impact on us. That story can then give rise to all sorts of emotions, thoughts and feelings that can translate into action. So you might say something that is inappropriate or just not helpful in the situation. You might snap back at that person, or you might get sulky and go into silence. Silence or verbal violence, they're often the two reactions people have. But personal resilience is that ability, I guess, to look at the facts of the situation, that if a person said something, there could be many reasons why that happened. It may not necessarily be that they were setting out to attack you personally or undermine the project or however you interpreted the situation. So it's always about checking back in. What's the data? What actually happened? So people who are personally resilient in a communication situation are able to just take that step back and check in with the facts. They either literally check in by asking, am I correct in what I'm seeing here? Or they just remind themselves that actually there are many different ways this could be interpreted. What I've come up with is just one of them. So let's just take a chill for a second and see how it unfolds. And I think there's great power in being able to stage those little mini self-interventions can make a great difference in terms of moving away from miscommunication and getting back onto everybody sharing the same meaning.
Yeah, certainly. So when we talk about like active listening and the role listening plays in all this, how can it come in to sort of prevent and resolve miscommunication?
Well, for me, the power of communication and being able to listen actively is first off, it's making it your mission to seek clarity, making sure that at least on your side of the equation, you're very, very clear about what's being said. You're being clear in what you're saying, but you're also clear in what others are saying and meaning. And often we don't take the time to clarify, and that's why open questions are incredibly important. Also reducing uncertainty. If you have a conversation or a meeting or a Zoom call or whatever it is, and people are still uncertain about what are the next steps or who's doing what or why did this happen, there's likely to be miscommunication, and that's going to lead to some sort of issue. So again, if you're all about clarity and reducing or removing uncertainty as much as you can by asking great questions, to recapping, to going back and making sure that everybody's heard things as clearly as possible, that's going to do a power of good in efficiency, but also harmonious workings, less misunderstandings. People may not like what they're hearing, or they may not be happy with the issue or the change or the decision, but at least if it's clear, that goes a long way to acceptance. Even in a change, people are not necessarily always opposed to the change itself. What they often are opposed to is the fear, the uncertainty that comes up with what's going to happen to them on the journey to the change. So if we can ask questions that bring that to the surface, that's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, and when we talk about seeking clarity, I mentioned before that sometimes people are trying to win conversations as opposed to seeking to understand. So how do we stop ourselves from wanting to win those conversations? Because I feel like asking questions to gain clarity first involves us, not wanting to win that conversation and wanting to understand instead.
That starts with a choice, doesn't it? You need to catch yourself in that moment. It takes a degree of humility that we don't have to be right all the time. We don't have to be the loudest voice. And I often say to clients, clarify, don't justify. Because the other thing we get into, when our back gets up a little bit and the other person's not agreeing with us, we go into justification mode. Well, this is why this is important. This is why, my opinion is the right one here. So it's a self-intervention, and it's making a choice that actually I'm going to calmly explain my position, but without justifying. And if you can get into that mindset, amazing things happen to your physiology. It takes a defensive tone out of your voice. It changes your expression and your gestures and all of those things, because now you're just explaining a position and you're showing that you're very open to hearing other positions. While you're in justifying mode, justifying why you're right, that's an argument. That's not a conversation. And, it depends really how aware you are, how prepared you are to do some inner work and do some practice and make some personal changes so that you can be more, prone to just being calm rather than justifying. It's entirely possible to do that. And I've worked with many people who've made transformations in the way they communicate by making that choice. Because the alternative is not very productive. They're just in shouting matches all the time. Where does that get you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. It gets you nowhere. And so you shared one strategy. So you have to make a choice first that this is what you want to do. This is the type of listener you want to be in a conversation.
Yeah.
Are there any other practical strategies you could recommend that we could implement into our daily lives to try and reduce miscommunication?
So learn to ask great questions. And in my book, the most powerful questions are how and what questions, or derivatives of that. How would it look if what would happen if we considered X, Y, Z? They're what we call above the line questions, as in they're in the realm of exploring possibilities rather than why did this happen, which is more accusatory, below the line, keeping everybody in negativity and victimhood. So that can take practice because it doesn't come naturally to everybody. And again, it takes a degree of humility because we're programmed as humans to go straight to solution mode, which is why many of us, me included a lot of the time, are prone to jump in with our own solution and then argue for our case. So practice those questions. And then following on from that, and we've touched on this, is the silence. Learn to ask open questions and then zip it. Zip the lips and breathe and listen. It's funny, back in my TV days, and you might have heard of this, we used to talk about the 7-second rule. And I'm pretty sure there's no scientific basis to this at all, but certainly in practice, very true, because you're doing a TV interview with somebody, a bit like you're interviewing me now, and some people would take a while to come in, or they'd finish their answer and they'd pause, and, maybe the next bit was going to be the juiciest thing that they'd say, but the interviewer would jump in. So we always knew to wait, because at about the 7-second mark, somebody will break the silence. Doesn't have to be you. So count to yourself, breathe and count 7 seconds. If the person hasn't spoken by that stage, it's probably time to come in and ask another question or do something else. But don't jump in before 7 seconds, because you're robbing them of the opportunity to share what's going on for them, and you're missing that opportunity to learn more in that situation.
Yeah, I love that. And I also loved what you mentioned before about fighting for our case in conversations. It's made me realize how quickly a conversation can go from being back and forth to being very one-sided and to being about one person or the other person. And a conversation is supposed to be fluid, and it's supposed to be an exchange and an interplay between two people, but it can very quickly turn into focus on me, what I'm saying, I'm right, this is my position, you should see things this way. How do we remind ourselves that a conversation is a conversation, it literally is what it means, it's supposed to be between two or more people?
Well, it has to start with awareness, because you're right. There are people who just go in and it's all about them, and they're what I call toppers. You probably know somebody like that. That doesn't matter what you say. They've been there and done it, and it was much better. It was much better then, or it was bigger or faster, or all of those things. They're not great people to be around, but they're out there. It really starts with awareness. It really starts with you asking yourself, is that me? Do I do that? Because if you're not aware, you've got no chance of changing it. In neuro-linguistic programming, we talk about being in different positions in conversations. So first position is when you are having an interaction entirely from your own perspective. So everything is about what's going on in your mind, and anything anyone else says is really all about the impact on you. Now, sometimes we have to be in first position. If you're being asked for your opinion, you're asking me a question now, I have to be in first position. I'm giving you my opinion. There are other times where you have to be speaking, from your own thoughts. But if you're in that position all the time, that's going to get very tedious for everybody else, and you're not letting anybody else in. Second position is now where you see things from the other person's perspective entirely. So you're now thinking, well, this is the place of curiosity. This is a place of empathy, where you're thinking, is that interesting? I've never thought about that. I wonder where that is coming from. Oh, what is it about that that's caused that person to respond in that way? So it takes all the heat out of it. Now, you can't be in second position all the time, because then you could be a doormat. You're making your life completely about the other person. Third position is where you're helicopter view. And now you can see the opportunities. Okay, what would it look like if we considered doing this? And that can get you to options and solutions. So the cool thing about this is you can choose. Once you're aware, you've actually got the ability to choose. Okay, am I in first position? Do I need to be in second, deep second, where now I'm listening? Or is this an opportunity for third? That's a powerful space to be in. Not in a manipulative way, but in a positive way for the good of all parties, can make a massive difference. So, if you feel like, and any of the listeners feel like you're kind of stuck in first gear, first position, probably time to practice being in second and just seeing what it's like for that other person.
Yeah, and that awareness is so important, and that's something we have to develop over time. And I think even with me, I've noticed that I want to be more aware of the way I speak to people and listen to people. And it's made me sort of think about the things that I'm doing while I'm talking. And we've heard of all those things, make eye contact, ask questions, be present, wait until the other person's finished talking so you can speak. And sometimes it's just a lot going on, and it takes you away from the conversation and you're no longer present in it. Instead, you're in your head and you're like, okay, wait, I have to make eye contact, but I also have to listen. I have to wait till they stop speaking. And there's just a lot there. So how can we make this process feel natural as opposed to being really pressured?
Yeah, we are in a delirium of distraction in our world, aren't we? There is so much going on. Even apart, we don't even need to go into it. People know what all the distractions are. And I'm certainly noticing this in so many different ways with many of the leaders that I'm working with. Really, I work with a lot of leaders who need to communicate in very high stakes situations. So, for example, I was coaching a leader a couple of years ago, somebody whose name people would probably know, who had to make quite a negative, very public announcement. And when we were working through, the content and having a bit of a rehearsal, it was evident to me that his mind was not there. It was in 1,000 different directions. He would come into our session and he'd be on the phone and he just wasn't there. And I had to say to him, a person who's a very skilled communicator, I had to say, this situation is going to live or die by your ability to master your presence, to actually, for the time that you've got to be on, which probably was going to be about an hour to make this announcement and do questions, you have absolutely got to put everything else aside. You've got to make that choice. You've got to clear your mind. And we practice some techniques, nothing terribly earth-shattering, starting with some breathing, some proper breathing right down into your abdomen rather than up high in the chest. We did some visualizing. We did some other things so that for the time he was on, we're not saying that you've got to be in a monk-like state for 24 hours, but making that commitment for the time you're in that conversation or that meeting, whatever it is, you're entirely present so that you can be at your absolute best for the people there. And this is about being of service. So I'd love to tell you there was a magic wand, Joanna, to kind of make all this distraction go away, but there really isn't. So listeners may not have a dramatic situation like the one I've just described, but you can take that into your everyday examples. Talking to a friend, just practice. Okay, for the 30 seconds we're going to have this conversation, I'm just going to really lean in. I'm going to let them know with every fibre of my being that I'm here and I'm present. Just try that and see what difference it makes. And I think you'll notice something profound going on. It's not easy because, that everybody's trying to get your attention. And I fear that we're going to lose that human connection if we don't doggedly and deliberately build our muscle and our skill in being able to keep the connection. I think we need more connection than ever before in this particular time in history.
Yeah, definitely. And connection is so important. And it's made me think about, for me, how important eye contact is and, the different kinds of eye contact there is. You're looking at a person, but then you can actually be looking at a person and making eye contact with them. And I find that actually looking, eye to eye with someone, it really draws you in to that space with them. And, everything else kind of just disappears and you have to, focus on them and what they're saying. And it's very powerful, but it can also be quite intimidating making eye contact with someone because you're connecting with them on a level that's different to texting them or FaceTiming or something over a phone or a device.
That's right. And we've become very disconnected and disengaged, haven't we, with all those tools, which are wonderful. We've got more ways to be connected, but we're less connected than ever. So sometimes I wonder if you've ever experienced this. I've gone in to pay for petrol and then I've got in the car to drive away and I've realised I didn't even look at the person behind the counter, which is shameful. Imagine going through your shift at the service station with just people coming and going and they don't even look at you. And that's because busy, distracted, all of those things. But when I actually remember and I'm mindful, I make it my business to look at that service station attendant right in their eyes and I'll say something that connects. The difference that makes, you get better service too. So I'd love to challenge everybody listening just to give that a go over the next week because you'll feel great. You're giving them a gift and, they're standing in a service station all day. I'm sure it's not the easiest job in the world. You might make them smile. That's going to give you a lift and then you can practice that more. But you've got to lead the dance because you're right. People are more inclined to withdraw and just be on their devices and not make the first move. Communication is like a dance and I challenge you, I encourage everybody to make the first step leading the dance. What's the worst thing that can happen? You look at a person and they choose not to look back. Well, that's sad. If you try it again, they might do something differently because they're distracted too. Somebody's got to make the first move and, maybe it could be you.
Yeah, I think that's so important and so crucial that you brought that up because the amount of times I've been walking on the street or just walking around where I live and there's someone else walking toward me and my immediate reaction is look down, avoid eye contact and just walk past because something about making eye contact, looking at someone, making expressing, a smile or something like that feels very confronting because I'd rather be on my phone where it's comfortable and I don't have to do anything. So I feel it's so important to maintain those interactions and you actually feel a lot better about yourself when you smile at someone and they smile back or sometimes people even say, hey, how are you? Or good morning. And that's just really refreshing.
It is. And look, there's plenty of research, plenty of data around that shows the increase in loneliness and social disconnection. And sometimes there are bigger reasons for that. And sometimes we're our own worst enemies, aren't we? Because we put up those walls because we're walking along. And again, that might be out of distraction or it just might be, don't look at this person, they're going to think I'm weird. Well, you might just be giving them a little glimmer of light on what could be a very dark day for them. You just don't know. And so I think some of this is really about making the choice to be of service, to not making it all about us. That's not always easy. But if we can take that approach, that can make a profound difference to our interactions.
Yeah. And going back to this idea of distraction, sometimes there's distractions around us, our phones, whatever's going on in the environment around us. But I feel sometimes we might have mental distractions, our minds are just so full of clutter, thoughts. What am I doing now? What am I doing tomorrow? This thing just happened. I have to sort that out. But how can we use mindfulness as a way of kind of clearing our thinking and making space for deeper connections and active listening?
Yeah, and that's so true, Joanna. That's right, because some distractions are physical, some are mental and emotional.
Yeah.
So some simple things you could do is just make sure, write things down. Don't rely on your brain to have to remember everything. I mean, our brains are always trying to conserve energy, so they will just dump stuff. The brain it'll dump stuff that it considers to be less important, but that actually might be something that you need to remember. So, make notes, download your brain so that you don't have to remember things. That's one way. But some other ways, and this is for situations where you really do need to be present, like an important conversation or, a phone call with a parent where you don't want to be drifting off, you want to be paying attention, or maybe it is a meeting or a presentation. One little trick I do is I visualize, for me, it's like an airport trolley with all the baggage piled up. Now, during COVID, that was a bit of a fantasy because we couldn't do it. It was like a dream. But I imagine that, and that's my baggage. That's everything that I've accumulated over the day or over the past week, or all the mental and emotional stuff we're talking about. And if I'm going into an interaction or even a situation like this where I'm being interviewed, I'll just visualize that trolley being left at the door, either the physical door or the virtual door. And so that baggage is just there. Now it's still there. It'll be there when I come back to it. I haven't made it disappear.
Yeah.
But I just leave it there. And I just find that just really helps to separate that from the situation at hand. There's lots of other techniques. There's a technique called the third space, which you might be aware of, Dr. Adam Fraser's model, which is really about whenever you're coming from an activity and going into another one, there's a third space in between, and that might really just be a couple of seconds, or it might be 10 minutes or half an hour, and it's resetting yourself in that third space. So you come out of one situation, which might be, feeding the dog, I don't know, or something where you've got a lot on your mind. You close that off. That might be writing down anything that, I've got to get more dog food, got to make sure the dog's outside, whatever, anything that might be residual. And then you think about the next step. What am I doing next? Okay, I'm being interviewed on a podcast. Okay, so have I got everything I need? Got my notes? Am I set before you go into it? So even taking, and again, it might be very quick. It might be the time it takes to walk from one meeting room to another, or get off one Zoom call onto a Teams call, or whatever it is, again, can make a huge difference to your presence and then the effectiveness of that next piece of communication.
Yeah, certainly. And we're talking a lot about strategies, and they're all so useful because they're addressing not only our mental clutter, but also like some physical clutter that can exist. So how do you think that practicing active listening and putting all these like strategies into play can impact our connections, both personally and professionally? What can we see start to change or transform?
Well, basic human values are feeling safe and feeling respected. So think about it. If you're not actively listening, if you're doing the opposite to some of the things we're talking about, you're distracted, you're jumping in, you're pushing your own position, there's a pretty good chance the people in that interaction certainly are not going to feel respected, and they may not even feel psychologically safe, depending on, how heated the conversation might get. So I always start there. And what you find, if you can remind yourself that these are shared values for all of us. So what can I do to make this other person feel that they're safe in this conversation? And that starts with letting them know that I'm present, and then making sure that they feel respected by asking open questions and giving them that courtesy of giving them the space, holding space for them so that they can share their position and share their feelings. And that will start to build the more you practice these skills. And it is a practice. Most people, in my experience, don't just turn up in the world as amazing, naturally gifted communicators. Now, there are some people who do, and I'm sure your listeners are probably thinking of somebody who's an amazing communicator. Most people aren't. We actually have to learn and practice the skills. And while I've been working in this space for many years, I learn things every day. I learn something new every day in this space. And even leaders who are amazing communicators, there's always room to improve. And some of this, at the most basic level, understanding those direct interactions can be part of that. So be aware, start to think about what your areas of development might be, and just start to work on little elements, experiment, and notice the difference that makes to your interactions and relationships.
Yeah, definitely. And I've noticed that, like, when I start paying attention to how I listen to other people, it actually makes me feel like a better person because I'm actually creating a space where I can focus on someone else other than myself and be like, am I being present for them and what they want to say? Because it's important as well. And I feel like that comes back to empathy, which is something you touched on before. So, how can cultivating empathy really increase our ability to listen? And how do we even begin to cultivate more empathy?
Yeah, so this is that second position of communication I was talking about, where you're really thinking about what is the situation like for them. When you think about it, good communication is always actually about the other person. It's not really about you. Most people think it's about, what they're pushing out, which is
Yeah.
why a lot of people aren't particularly effective communicators. But actually, if you can get it into your head that this piece of communication, whether it's a phone call to a friend or talking to your boss, whatever it is, this will go so much better if I can frame my message, not in a negative, manipulative way, but if I can frame it just through their lens, through their eyes. And just thinking about Barack Obama, who many people consider is a masterful communicator, and I agree with that. His
Yeah.
speechwriter, John Favreau, was talking about empathy. I've actually got a quote from him here about why Obama's speeches were so powerful. And he was obviously amazing at delivering them. But Favreau said you have to know what the world looks like when you're in their shoes. One of the reasons why Obama's speeches are so successful is because they're written in the language that his audience understands, addressing the issues they are facing. And to me, that is empathy. It doesn't mean that you're not being authentic. You're still being who you are, but you've
Yeah.
taken the trouble to really listen to their cues, to listen to the type of language, the things that are important, and then you're framing your response through their eyes rather than simply pushing your message at them. Flipping that around makes a profound difference. Doesn't mean that you're necessarily feeling sorry for them or giving them everything that they're asking for. It's not so much that, but it's framing it, making it about what's most important to them. Good marketers understand this, but it's actually the same in positive communication. It's really flipping it around into that second position and thinking about, is this the language that they use? And is it addressing the issues they're facing? And it's from a place of service. It's from a place of what do they need most, not what do I need to push at them most. And that's the difference.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes me think about like some of the best connections and relationships I've had with people is where I felt understood. And that's sort of like the key there because they're not just talking at me or with me, but I'm actually being understood by what they're saying and how we're communicating. And I feel like that concept of being understood is so crucial because you can form really great relationships with other people when you understand one another. And like there's that mutual understanding between you of what you're going through and what they're going through and how you can relate through that.
Absolutely. And that doesn't necessarily mean you agree with them on everything either. If you
Yeah.
feel understood, that's crucial in building trust. There's a great book called The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey is the son of a more famous Stephen Covey who wrote a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Very, very famous book. Stephen Covey, his son, has written The Speed of Trust. And he talks about exactly that building trust, building understanding greases the wheels of communication. If you think about it, you can have the most perfect piece of communication with somebody. Let's say it's at work. You've really prepared a presentation, or you've gone into a conversation with your boss and you've practiced it. You know exactly what you want to say. But if there's not trust and understanding, if you don't feel understood, or if they don't feel understood, the chances are miscommunication is going to happen. But if you interact with somebody where there is a lot of trust, they make you feel understood and vice versa, the communication doesn't have to be perfect. You can take shortcuts. It might be a bit fumbling. You mightn't use the right words. There might be something that you don't agree with. But if that trust and understanding is there, it doesn't matter. And in fact, the relationship can even be strengthened because of that. So that's seeking to understand and first, before being understood, very, very powerful. And when two people practice that in a conversation or a relationship, very, very effective.
Yeah, and I feel like it's another level when like you can understand what someone's saying, but you don't necessarily have to agree with it. And they can be like, oh, wow, like, yeah, I respect you. You don't have to agree with what I'm saying or have the same position as me, but you're still able to understand me. I feel like that is so profound that you don't actually have to share the exact same values and beliefs in order to relate and connect to someone else.
Yes, and it's almost like two things are happening at the same time. You're building a deep sense of rapport and relatability at a very human level. But at the same time, whatever it is you're communicating about, you've been able to take the feelings out of it and really focus on the facts. And that can happen simultaneously. It's an interesting process. And when you can do that, yes, you can talk about some really tricky things and, nobody walks away crying or angry. You might agree to disagree. It might get a little uncomfortable. But you're still able to have those conversations and preserve the relationship, because the problem is often we go into conversations that are kind of negative in nature. You might be having to give somebody negative feedback, and because we don't practice that active listening, we don't demonstrate understanding all the things that you've said, the relationship comes out second best, and trust is damaged or even destroyed and takes a long time to get back because we're not practicing those skills. And, I guess it takes two to tango, but we can't control the other person. I often say to clients, wouldn't it be handy if you could just reach inside the other person's head? You had a remote control and you could kind of program them, but isn't happening yet. We won't rule it out for the future. But often what we do, if a situation is difficult, our go-to tool is a magnifying glass that we hold up to the other person and hone in on, okay, what are the things here that I need to fix? What are the things about you that I need to change? And what I encourage everyone to do is actually put the magnifying glass down and pick up a mirror. Pick up the mirror first. And instead, it sounds pretty cliched, but it's so true, isn't it? That we look at that person in the mirror because they're the only one we can control. It's got to start inside each of us, and again with a choice. Even if the other person's acting out, it's going into curiosity. It's going into open questioning. It's maybe just taking a breath rather than having to be right. All of those things are going to help to diffuse the situation so that hopefully at some point, maybe not even in that conversation, maybe you put the conversation on hold and regroup, but maybe at a point in the future, you can come together with a bit more of a shared understanding.
Yeah, definitely, because you have to let other people do what they're going to do. You just got to let them do that, because that's all you really can do. I mean, sure, you can be like, no, don't do this or do that. But again, like, I feel like it's just so hard to go to someone and be like, you should be doing this, or what you're doing's wrong, or something like that. But it's easier to look at ourselves and change the things that we want to within ourselves, as opposed to doing that through other people. And I'd love to transition into our practices and habits, and I'd love to focus on what you do personally to address miscommunication.
Yeah, and look, let's not make any pretense here that I'm perfect at this. I'm human like everybody else. I've had the fortune and privilege over my career to be exposed to a lot of learning in this area, and then working with a lot of great communicators. So I've had the advantage of seeing those at work. I think for me, my key things are back to this idea of leading the dance. If there's an issue, whether that's work or personal, we're in a bit of an avalanche of evasion at the moment, avoidance. People don't want to have difficult conversations. They'd rather just, stick their earpods in and listen to something and not do that. If there are issues are ticking time bombs, whether that's in a business, an organisation, or a relationship. And again, it's taking that initiative and leading the dance and just having the courage to have a brave conversation that puts the other person first. That's probably my number one practice. Do I always do it well? No. But if you don't do that, what's going to happen to the relationship? The other one is managing my personal state. It's recognizing, and again, I'm not a master here, but it's recognizing that it starts inside of me. If I go into a conversation feeling in any way angry or unsettled, no matter how hard I try, that is going to come out. The other person is going to pick up on that. And so how can I do whatever I can to manage my state so I'm as calm as possible, and my intentions are genuinely for the good of everybody in the meeting. Doesn't mean everyone's going to get what they want. Might mean that somebody comes off second best. It could be a situation in a business where you've got to lay people off or whatever. But you can still go in with everybody's best intentions given the circumstances at heart. And if you do that again, people will pick up on that. So managing your state. And the third one is what we've already covered a little bit around seeking clarity first, clarifying, not justifying, trying to leave the defensiveness outside. I'm a work in progress with that. But those three things, taking the first step, managing my state, clarifying, not justifying, they're my top three right now.
Yeah, and I love that whole idea of taking the first step, because we're often like, oh, I'll just wait for the other person to do it first and then I'll go because I feel more safe once they've started something, and then I can just pick it up from there or just follow in their lead. But sometimes you do really need to make the first step and make that decision to be the first one to do something, like we talked about before, being the first one to smile at someone or say hi or, make that eye contact.
Yeah, and think of, that can be so uncomfortable, can't it, when you just know there's an issue, it's an undercurrent, whether that's a personal relationship or a workplace situation. A good leader, and you don't have to be literally the leader, you could take a leader-like approach. A good leader will actually bring that to the surface. There's nothing wrong with conflict. Conflict is part of life. We're all very different. We come from different backgrounds. We're not going to agree. But it becomes destructive when it's either buried because nobody wants to acknowledge it. It's buried, it's festering. One day it's just going to go probably at the most inopportune time, or it turns into massive confrontation because people don't approach it in an appropriate way. So nothing wrong with the conflict being there, but if you leave it to its own devices, it's probably not going to go away of its own accord. So having the skills to be able to bring it to the surface respectfully, in a way that preserves relationships, you do that, you are going to be a powerhouse of communication with fabulous relationships in all elements of your life.
Yeah. And how have you felt implementing these three sort of strategies and steps changed your perception of communication in your life?
Well, I think it's great for reducing anxiety. A bit like I've just described, when you know something's wrong, it can be incredibly stressful to let that keep bubbling away. So having the courage to have a brave conversation that puts the other person first really can help to alleviate that anxiety. Again, you mightn't get the ideal result, but at least it's come to the surface and you know what's going on. So that enables you to discuss difficult things and potentially preserve the relationship. So that's something that I've found. Generally, less stress and less anxiety, and issues are then not prone to escalate so much. You'll still have problems, you'll still have issues, but you can address them in a kind of reasonable way before they become catastrophes. Whereas a lot of the time, if we ignore them, they'll surface in other ways, and that can be really destructive. So, I guess the short answer is it's helped me be more calm and have less anxiety in daily life. Building personal resilience helped me to be more present and feel more joy and happiness. That's not the case every day, of course, as it is for all of us, but certainly that's made a big impact in my life.
Yeah. And with these practices, I know that sometimes we can beat ourselves up when we're trying to implement new things into our life that it's not working, or we didn't get it right the first time, or yes, we told ourselves we were going to, look up and smile at that person, but we just continue to look at our phone. And you start beating yourself up for that. You're like, why didn't I do that? I could have done it then. So how do we be more gentle with ourselves and practice more compassion?
Yeah, well, these things take courage, and often we're breaking lifelong habits. And so we're wired, and really the only way is to give yourself, a trigger. Perhaps it's if you're going to make it your mission to smile at the service station attendant, maybe there's something about the way you drive into the petrol station. Maybe there's something there that you can give yourself a little trigger point. Yeah. That's the reminder. Maybe it's when you you open the petrol bowser or you put the pump in or something like that. The noise of the pump something that can kind of break that cycle of high distraction when you go in. Intervening on personal habits, that's a podcast in itself, isn't it? And it's not easy, but it certainly starts with being aware of the impact that's having, making the choice to change it, and then taking some little micro steps, like setting a trigger and just making a decision that that's what I'm going to do. But practicing self-love is so important, isn't it? We've talked a lot about showing consideration and respect and creating safety for the other person. And of course, we need to do that for ourselves as well. I'm not suggesting that you're going to be a martyr and making it all about the other person. You've got to show compassion and empathy for yourself as well. And we're fighting a lot of deliberate distraction. Social media providers who are very, very good at making us addicted to what they dish up to us. So, we've got to cut ourselves some slack there, that it's pretty hard to fight that. But it's an amazing, courageous person who is able to take those steps and celebrate the wins, because there will be wins that come with it.
Yeah, and I love that. And thank you for sharing that, because I feel like it's such an important message. And yes, we've been talking a lot about, like you said, focusing on the other person, but you're also a person in this equation too when it comes to a conversation. So focusing on yourself and what you're actually doing right. Like, it takes a lot to actually get to a point where you've realized you want to change some habits, because a lot of people are set in their habits and they don't ever come to that point where they're like, oh, I want to change this. And even just getting to that point where you realize you want to change is a feat in itself that should be celebrated. So I think that's really important to acknowledge as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the thing with habits, everybody listening, we can pretty much predict what our lives are going to be like in 5 years' time, taking out of, unforeseen dramas out of the equation. But because we make the same decisions, we do the same things, we drive the same way to the shops, we do the same things. And if you keep doing what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got. And so the same things will tend to unfold in a pattern. And that might be fantastic. You might be listening to this thinking, well, that's awesome. My life is incredible. I'm really happy for that to continue over the next 5 years. Or you might be thinking, hang on, this is not what I want in my future. Yeah. And the only way that's going to change is if something changes inside you. That's hard medicine to swallow, but it's the truth. And that can start with some of those little habits. It starts with making a choice. You've got to do things differently if you want to get a different result. I don't know any other way to do it, but being aware is key. And just the fact that you're listening to this conversation says something about the type of person you are, and being open to these types of concepts and ideas.
Yeah, certainly. And I feel like there's a bit of hope in that as well. Like, you don't have to wait for external forces or someone or something outside of yourself to make that change in your life. Like, you can make that change, and that's hope within itself. If you're not happy with how your life is, and if you don't see it being this way in 5 years, then you can be the one to change that. You don't have to wait until someone comes along and changes that, there's uncertainty in that. And you want to be able to drive your own life as opposed to leaving that to other people.
100%. And I would argue that you are the only person who can change that. Yes, somebody might come along and offer you $1 million, and I hope they do, or something else might happen. But as James Wedmore, who I referred to earlier about his podcast, likes to say, there's no mayor of the universe who's going to bestow things on you necessarily. You've actually got to make the choice to make change yourself. And that's getting out of your comfort zone, getting into your learning zone, being prepared to try new things, being prepared to maybe not always get it right. People who make those choices generally are the ones that are going to bring wonderful things into their life. And it starts inside each of us.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Neryl, for sharing those strategies with us. This brings us to our last section for today, which is our open mic. And how this one goes is I'll hand it over to you and you can talk about anything that you would like to. It's a free space.
Amazing. Okay, well, I'm not quite sure how long I've got, so I'll be very brief. Look, one of the most dramatic things that has happened to me in my life was my husband, Mike. He wasn't my husband at the time. Back in 2010, having a terrible motorbike accident. It was a near fatal accident. And that in itself is quite a story. But really the part of it that I want to share is he was in a very bad way. He was in a wheelchair for a while. We were both told that our lives would become very different. He would really not be able to run his business. He wouldn't be able to do a lot of things. I had people telling me on the side, look, it's time to get out. He's not going to recover. He won't be the same person. But Mike is a very determined person. And while he couldn't ride, he was a very a skilled competitive motorbike rider. He'd actually been training for a major event when he crashed. Couldn't do that anymore. But he decided to take up a new sport, which is ocean surf ski paddling. So it's like kayaking. They do it out on the ocean. They go miles out to sea. They're crazy. I don't do it. He started to do that as part of his rehab. And I was running a goal-setting workshop one night, and he came along kind of to make up the numbers. And he said to me, I'm going to set a goal. I want to be on the Australian team for the World Championships it was 2017 at the time, 18 months' time. And we both laughed. We called that, I used to refer to that as his giggly goal because we couldn't say it without giggling. He was so far-fetched. He could barely walk. He'd won't even go into all of those details. He was in a bad way. But he made that call, I'm going to do that. And then he just made a choice. He was going to start to take the micro actions and the micro steps to get himself onto the Australian team. So over the course of the next 18 months, he did something every day. Sometimes it was small, sometimes it was a big shift. That would take him to that goal. Little by little, he started to compete in races. He got stronger. He started to win races. And this went on for 18 months. Lots of things happened. So fast forward to 18 months. And by this stage, we weren't laughing at this goal anymore. The Australian team was announced for this event. And guess whose name was on it? He got onto the Australian team. We could not believe it. He'd achieved that goal. And so we thought we might as well go to the World Championships. They were in Hong Kong. So off we went against the best competitors in the world, all different age groups, a huge event, massive ocean swell. He competed in this race and you couldn't tell where anybody came because they all looked like drowned rats. They're all wriggling wet. Anyway, got to the end. He gets a tap on the shoulder. So it turns out in his age group, he won the bronze medal at the World Championships. And so we wrote a book together about this. And on the front is a montage. There's a photo of him in his hospital bed looking absolutely smashed up and in a terrible state next to standing up in the Australian team uniform on the dais with the medal around his neck and the trophy. The anthems are playing. And so I just want to put that out there to everybody here, whether it's becoming a more comfortable communicator, learning how to listen, whether it's something else. I know you've heard this before, but it is absolutely true that if you put your mind to it and you take action, absolutely anything is possible. So practice these skills we've talked about today. You can do it. You can make a big shift in your life. But if there's another goal you're thinking of, then visualize that every day and do something every day and you'll absolutely get there. It's entirely possible.
Wow.
That's my open mic.
I love that mic drop. That was amazing. And I love this combination of visualization, but also taking those actions, even if they're micro actions. Like you said, even if it takes you a course of 18 months to get to where you want to be, like doing something every day, even if it's minor, can really be a part of that bigger picture and, attaining what you've been visualizing. I feel like that's so amazing and so important.
Excellent. Yes. No, it's made a huge difference in our lives. And I love telling that story because it does have an impact on a lot of people. So I hope that's touched somebody who is listening today.
Oh, definitely. Thank you so much, Neryl, for coming on the show, sharing your stories and your insights with us. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
You're very welcome, Joanna. Thank you so much.
No worries. And for those of us who want to find out a bit more about you and your work, where can we go?
Well, my website is neryleast.com. It's like Cheryl with an N, Neryl, neryleast.com. And you can find me on all the socials. LinkedIn is my kind of platform of choice. You can check me out there, but you'll find me online in all sorts of places. So I'd love to connect with you.
Beautiful. Well, we've also got Neryl's details down in the description below if you did miss that. So thanks so much for tuning in and we'll see you all next time. You have been listening to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, pr.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.